Another funny thing would be to imagine what you could do with an apple. So, can you make it appear in front of you with like sparkly effects? And can you make it have an English accent and a monocle and a moustache and talk to you?
Welcome to another episode of Imagine an Apple with me as your host, Vynn and Francis.
Hey, hello.
Today we'll be having a conversation with Berbank, who has the amazing capability of being able to imagine dragons coming out of the pavement. So would you like to introduce yourself, Berbank?
Hi, yes, I'm Berbank Green. I'm a games designer, and thanks for having me on your podcast.
Wonderful. So before we go on, this is sort of becoming a rite of passage for anyone who comes onto our podcast. The first thing we have to ask you now is, can you imagine an apple?
Yes, I can imagine an apple. Yes, it's a greeny red. I think I found it out as a Braeburn apple, and it's on a white plate on a white linen sheet on a table, and there's a large window to the left, letting in a lot of light, and I can see beads of water on the apple, and I can also smell the apple, and I can feel how heavy it is, and I can taste it, but I'm not eating it. I can just see it.
That's pretty fantastic. Usually people, when I ask them to visualize an apple, they do just that. They imagine an apple. But you've gone well beyond that and imagine the window and the setting behind it. And you can also smell that. So this is quite interesting because that's new. No one has ever been able to imagine smells. Can you tell me what that's like? Do you remember the smell of the apple, or can you conjure the smell of it as you're thinking of it?
I can conjure the smell of it so much that the saliva glands in my mouth are starting to. I can feel it's like
That's
getting ready.
incredible.
Well, I do have practice. So Francis and I have been talking about this sort of thing for about, I don't know, 12 years or something. So I've had a lot of practice thinking about apples and other things. So maybe
Can
that's
you
part.
also do that with things other than apples? So can you
Yeah, I
imagine,
can do
say, perfume?
bananas. Yeah, I can do banana. I can smell a banana now and I can see it. It's quite a squidgy banana with lots of black bits on it.
That's impressive. Wow, we found someone who's much better at Fantasia than even I am.
Well, you have a magic ability that I don't have, I think, which is you can imagine text, can't you?
I can
Is that
dream
right?
in text. Yes,
Yeah,
this is
I
quite.
don't have any text ability at all. I can't imagine. I can sort of imagine a page of some text, but it gets very blurry and I
Mm,
can't see it properly.
So it's very much visual based rather than like text based. Fascinating. Right.
Well, I've got a question about the smell of the apple because I don't think I think of apples as having a taste, and I know taste and smell are very related, but I don't really think of them as having a strong smell.
It's not strong, but it's sweet. It's a sweet smell.
Mm.
Yeah.
And is it the smell after you've bitten into it, or because they
Yes.
smell more while you're eating them, or when we've cut one up?
I can choose between both now, you ask. So I'm
Interesting.
thinking about it now as I haven't eaten it, but if I do bite into it, I can smell the extra smells.
Wow. Can you also imagine the texture in your mouth?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes. I'm almost chewing on it now.
I've got to ask another imagine smell question then. Can you kind of construct creative new smells that aren't memories?
Mm.
That's a good question. Give me an example, and I'll see if I can do it.
I don't know. Have you watched Ratatouille before, where he starts like eating all the different kinds of things, and then he has like visualizations of, I don't know, cheese and strawberry,
Oh,
in
combining them.
yes,
Yeah, I think.
combining them with that.
Yeah, so this is something I thought about. Is that I reckon chefs might be really good, which is why I think you should interview some chefs. I can't do combinations that well, but I can do individual smells fairly well. So I can imagine broccoli now, and now I can do parmesan. Yeah, I can do them. I'm quite slow at it, and I can't combine them that easily. But yeah, there are probably people who can do this really well.
So an alien has just invaded from Mars, and they're kind of organic and a bit humanoid and green, and they land and walk up to you. Can you imagine what they smell like?
I can imagine a smell, but I don't know if it would be what they smell like in real life.
And it's a new smell; it's not a remembered smell.
Mm, it smells quite like a pond when I'm thinking of it. So I
Okay.
guess it's just I'm fusing the sort of greenness with pondness and
Mm,
stickiness. Yeah.
that's so cool.
So yeah, before this interview, I sent you a whole list of questions that I've been thinking about for a long time.
Mhm.
Should we talk about that?
Do you have a particular question that you want to answer? Like, is there a pet question you like to explore?
Well, I think what I'm really interested in is limits of imagination. So we're talking about smell just now. Can you imagine a smell that's so overpowering that it nearly knocks you out, or can you imagine an apple that's really far away, so far away you can't see it, or something that's so large that it stops being imaginable, or heavy? These sort of limits I'm really interested in, and seeing if people have very different limits.
Well, can you do that? Can you imagine a smell so strong that it
I
overpowers
can't.
you?
No, I'm not so good at smells. So I can imagine quite strong smells, but they're within the limits of my own experience. And I think that's going to be common with a lot of answers, as people's experiences are going to show their limits of their imagination. But
So
I might be wrong.
I very quickly dropped into the concept of the smell that knocks everyone out, and it had a
Mm,
kind of kinetic component to it, like it was literally people were like falling over, but I couldn't actually imagine the smell.
no.
But I can't imagine any smells. The apple far away, I get like like a long tube almost. It's very spatial. It's not really, and the apple is like a tiny, tiny distant dot.
How distant? How far? Roughly how far?
Oh, I don't think it's. I don't think it's that far. Probably only like 100 miles away or something.
100 miles is a long way away.
It's not that far. It's only 100 miles away.
I mean, a long way would be like in another galaxy.
Well, sure, but are you seeing it or are you feeling it?
It's basically just a green dot. It's
Yeah,
a bit like the pale blue dot or something of
okay,
the
but
space photo of the pale blue dot.
let's put a medium distance view. Say you're imagining the apple on, let's say, the moon, which isn't that far away. Okay, where are you when you're imagining it?
How far away is the moon?
I don't know.
It's quite far.
Well, you were saying galaxies, so Where,
So I can't do that without doing a camera cut. So my camera
there we
cuts to
go.
on the moon with the
Yeah.
apple down. It's like I'm in a drone or something, and the apple's on the ground, and it's
So,
like a small apple.
so what I'm saying is, without moving where you are, how far away can you imagine the apple?
About as far as if you're on a mountain and you're looking at the horizon. So like certainly 20 miles.
Yeah, but
But I obviously couldn't really see it. I'm only imagining seeing it.
okay. So that's an interesting thing, right? So your perception of it internally is limited by your external perception of it. So if you could see it in real life, you could possibly imagine it. But if it got a bit further away, so you couldn't see it in real life, it stops being easy to imagine.
But I can have a conceptual tunnel of it being a long way away. So,
Yeah.
and when I said 100 miles, that was not a memory of a thing, seeing a thing that far away. It was like the concept of, and it had like a energy to it.
The concept's a lot easier to imagine at any
Yeah.
distance. Yeah.
Visualization, like for me at least, I think I could imagine it like 50 meters away, and then
Yeah.
that's probably when I would like stop being able to see it, sort of like disappears into my horizon. But I think
But
that's what Berbank's kind of getting to.
don't you blend the visual with a conceptual? Because
You
I've
can.
got,
Yeah.
as it gets further away, I can't remember seeing something that distance, but I can make like this compound of the two.
So you're saying particularly remember, which is the interesting thing. So yes, obviously you can swap between visual imagination and conceptual imagination as it gets further away. But one other thing you could do is imagine you have better perception, like an eagle's perception,
Mm.
and you can see the apple further away. But how far can you push that?
Oh, that's interesting.
If you've got a 15 gigapixel camera, you can imagine an apple quite a long way away.
But then you'd go into like superhuman perception,
That's
which,
right.
I mean, I obviously have never experienced that, but I have experienced something similar to that, which is when I get new prescription glasses. So when I put my new glasses on, it's like I'm able to see things more sharply.
Mhm.
And that first glance at the sky is such an overwhelming feeling, because before it was just, it's blurry at best, and the sky was blue. And then suddenly, with the new prescription glasses or contact lenses, I can start to see like wisp of cloud and an eagle flying in the distance, and suddenly they're all there now, and I can see the stars when they come from the sky. And that's just me with like not quite like superhuman vision, but just like human vision at its like best, maybe like 20/20 vision.
Yeah.
I don't know if I could imagine it to a superhuman degree. I don't know what an eagle would be able to see, though I do imagine it to be much better than human. Could I do that? I don't know. I haven't tried. Couldn't you do that?
Well, I can a bit. So Chuck Yeager is a famous test pilot, and he had 20/10 vision. And when I was younger, I had nearly 20/10 vision, so I could see much, much better than most people. But I didn't know I could do that. So when people couldn't read things far away, I was confused. I just thought they were joking or something for a while. I don't have 20/10 vision anymore, unfortunately. But I can extrapolate from that to have slightly better vision. I can't do probably eagle vision and having like a supercomputer vision with a 15 gigapixel camera. I can't do either. But I can approach it slowly. I think the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Interesting. Fascinating. I can do like microscopic vision because I'm short-sighted. So whenever I'm looking at things without my glasses, I can get it much closer up to my face and get to see more detail. But obviously, when I have corrective vision, that all goes like awry, and I have to like take it away from my face a little bit. So maybe in that direction, I can do much better. I can see much smaller and more refined like things in my vision than someone with like 20/20 vision, for instance. So I think I can imagine it in that direction rather than like things in the far off distance.
So if you extrapolate that down, if you imagine you've got a keyboard in front of you, do you? So if you imagine an apple on your K key, for instance, and it's just on the top right of that K, and it's tiny, how much smaller can you make it? Can you zoom in and zoom in and zoom in?
I think I could only make it as small as a grain of sand at best.
I mean, I quickly imagine it atom-sized and camera pan to it being like a weird apple-shaped atom.
Yeah, but you're camera panning. You have to camera.
Yeah, I've done a zoom, like a micro zoom camera, and the same. The same with a large apple. If I imagine a larger and larger apple, it's quite easy to imagine an apple the size of the Earth, just in orbit around the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And I can just about imagine a galaxy-sized apple. That's hard because galaxies are disjoint objects, not a whole object like the Earth. But all I'm doing is camera panning back.
Yeah.
You can imagine an Earth-sized apple, Vynn?
No, I don't think I can. No, I don't think I can. I need to have a sense of how big the Earth is, and I don't think I know how big the Earth is.
Me either.
Oh, so I think it's almost easier for me because my imagination's so bad, so I don't really care. So I vaguely get it's as good to me as imagining a normal apple much more easily because the quality detail I need is less.
So this is an accuracy issue, right? So if you're imagining, let's say, the weight of an apple, I've got a fairly good feel of how weighty an apple is. If you expand it out to like the weight of a car, you get a sense of how heavy that is, but your accuracy goes down. If it was heavy as a bag of flour, you've got a pretty good sense of that. And you can go all the way down to maybe a pin. But after that, it starts getting hazy again.
Yeah, an apple's less dense than a bag of flour, so it's going to be bigger, but I couldn't tell you whether it's how much bigger it is to weigh the same as the bag of flour.
Or just if it was the same size but weighed as much as a bag of flour. If you just extrapolate just the weight, but keep the size of the apple the same.
That's weird because it wouldn't feel like an apple or a bag of flour. It would feel like a
But you're just
apple ball or something,
but you're just seeing what the extent of your imagination for just weight is. Yeah.
Can you do that?
To what? To what level?
The weight of the apple, and then also the size, the Earth-size apple.
I can't do Earth-size apple because I don't have a good enough understanding of how big the Earth is. I mean, I have a scientific understanding and a conceptual understanding, but not a experiential understanding.
Yeah.
You can't imagine being like in orbit and seeing the Earth-sized apple below you.
It's easy, yeah.
So that's an imagining an Earth-sized apple, isn't
It's
it?
not really. It doesn't feel like it's nearly accurate enough.
But just have it the same size as pictures you've seen from orbit.
Yeah, it doesn't feel nearly as accurate. It feels like a very rough approximation.
Yeah, so all my imagination is that rough.
Right. Yeah. So accuracy of your imagination is just as important as sort of the range of it, imagination. And they're all important. They're all useful things to, I'd say useful. They're completely unuseful, but they're interesting.
But do you think this makes me happier imagining more far out things because I don't care about the accuracy as much?
I don't think it has any, I don't know how it would affect your happiness. I guess that's individual based.
No, I mean more willing to.
Rephrase the question.
So, I mean, some people don't like science fiction, fantasy, and like extreme imagined things. And I wonder if you've got a really accurate imagination, you prefer to imagine realistic things or something.
Oh, yeah,
or,
could be. Yeah.
because you have no framework for knowing whether the more way out things are wrong. Whereas, because most of my stuff's conceptual and the element I need that's visual is relatively simple to do, I don't worry as much.
Yeah, could be. Yeah. I mean, these are all different areas of investigation, aren't they?
Cool. Okay, so a question I really want to explore is, and before we go into that, maybe I should start with something simpler. How many apples can you think of at once?
Drawing from my list. Yeah, about 7. No, it
Really?
gets hated to 5. Yeah. No, I can imagine lots more, but
Yeah, but with great detail, I thought you.
in detail, yeah,
How many
5,
did I do it?
6.
So if you imagine a barrel full of apples,
Yeah.
Could do that.
are they less detailed?
Well, the barrel's different. So barrel, you can only see the top surface. And I'm imagining a collection of apples rather than individual apples at the top. So that's easier. I can conceptually get that. But
So you can't see
actually
each apple on the top.
I can, but it's like foveated rendering.
Mm.
I can see an individual apple if I look at it, but looking at the whole top, I'm aware that I think I can see it properly, but if I look properly, some of the apples are a bit kind of blurry and more conceptual than visual.
So you can't count them, the ones how many there are on top.
If I did foveated rendering, I probably could, but it would take quite a lot of effort.
Interesting. I've never thought about the number of apples I could imagine, so I've always just imagined, oh, I can sort of imagine a flood of apples, but then obviously the accuracy would suffer.
Yeah.
I would never try to imagine each individual apple and see how many I could conjure up in one go. I'll have to give that a go. But you said 7.
Yeah, 7's about my limit, although obviously I can conceptually see a lot more.
Do you think, wait, did you start off with 7 or did you work your way up to 7? Because this is interesting, because this suggests that
I think I
you can
started
train
with
it.
4 or 5, worked up.
How long did it take for you to get there?
4 seconds or something like that. From 4 to 7. After 7, it's going up to like 10 or 12 seconds.
So it's not that difficult. It's like you only have to work at it for maybe like a few seconds and then you're suddenly like going past your previous limits.
Well, yeah, it's getting harder and harder every extra apple I'm adding to properly visualize it.
Mm-hmm. And this is just purely visualization. There's no like olfactory sensation to it.
No, I can add that, but again, it gets harder, and I think my apple, there's a limit. There's an informational limit I've got.
And there's a difference between smelling 1 apple and smelling 3 apples.
Yes, but not a great difference.
So if I keep my very low quality of imagining 1 apple, I can only get up to at best 3 and maintain that level of quality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so what about 4-dimensional apples?
Yeah, so I put that on the list because I thought of it just while I was putting it down. I don't know where to go with that. So I've been talking to Francis about 4-dimensional, hyperspheres.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been practicing trying to imagine those properly
mm-hmm.
and had some success. And an apple is roughly a sphere. So how much more difficult could it be to imagine a hyper apple? But it is actually quite difficult. So I have not got very far with that because I only thought of it this morning. How about you? Can you think of a hyper apple?
I don't think I could imagine what a four-dimensional apple looks like. I can just about barely imagine what a tesseract is supposed to look like, and
Mm-hmm.
only because tesseracts are now like a pop culture phenomenon in like
Yeah.
science fiction, and so they show the tesseract like rotating. So I've seen it and I know what it's supposed to look like from memory, but I don't think I could imagine four-dimensional cube or four-dimensional sphere or even four-dimensional pyramids from scratch, if you get what I mean.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've done the same as you. I've watched lots of Tesseracts and wondered if
Yes.
I could. I think if I hadn't seen it, I wouldn't be able to do it. But with a hypersphere, it's a little easier. And I can't imagine it from a four-dimensional perspective, but I can imagine slices from a three-dimensional perspective. And I'm getting better at that. But I'm trying to make the leap to 4 dimensions, but I'm not sure it's possible with our human brains.
So it's funny because the first thing I think of is conceptual, in that I mean, easily makes me think about digestive systems being fundamentally three-dimensional, because you can't have a hole all the way through an organism that's two-dimensional, that's splitting it in half. So then I'm wondering immediately, if you have the digestive system of a four-dimensional creature, is that similar? Maybe is that two-dimensional, three-dimensional, and that would be impact like what apple they could eat or what apple evolved and what apple, in the ecosystem of four-dimensional things eating each other, what even is an apple? And I think I don't know enough to know where that goes, but that's where I would start.
That's where you'd start. That's a whole level of complexity beyond where I'd want to start. just the apple on its own is difficult enough.
Well, I think it would look different, because I think the way seeding would happen in the four-dimensional space would be different. So the apple would be a different...
Yeah. You can extrapolate in all sorts of different ways of how different it would be, but I'm just starting with just its shape, and that's hard enough.
This kind of reminds me of that four-dimensional game. I can't remember what it's called, but there was a game that got a lot of hype a few years back, which involved like four-dimensional game mechanics. Do you think you'd ever like make a game that involved a four-dimensional apple or something?
Oh, I'd love to. I mean, I love that. I can't remember the name of it either, but it was really fascinating to watch, and I could see how it would be interesting to play. I think he had some trouble with level design with that for understandable reasons. Yeah, I think it's fascinating to play with. There's a toy he made for iOS, I think, which is a four-dimensional. I think it's called Four-Dimensional Toys, where he took the programming of that and made primitive shapes in 4D that you could play with and throw around, and that was really fun. Yeah, it's a fascinating area to think of, because I'm not sure the human brain is capable of doing it at all.
There's an entire Wikipedia article with a list of four-dimensional games.
Mm-hmm.
I've just done a Google search, and the one that I was thinking of was Miyagakure, which is a map game where you're supposed to but that's what it's named. If anyone, that's the name of the game I was thinking of. If anyone's wondering. Cool. So, going back to the video game theme, when you're designing a video game, what is your inner mental experience like?
If it's right at the start of the design, it will be fully trying to imagine playing it as if I'm sitting in front of a screen playing it. So I say fully. Usually it's kind of box based, so it's not fully realized characters or scenery, but it is shapes and mechanics, because mechanics is usually the thing you want to start with a game. So I will imagine the mechanics in as much detail as possible and play it through and see what problems might arise. And that, I would say, that's somewhere between 60 to 80% accurate. And then if it's good, I'll try and prototype it. And depending on my programming ability, that will come out closer or not to my imagination. And then I'll iterate from there. But it saves a lot of time if you can imagine it first.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us more about like what sorts of games you design?
So I've spent the last 12 years making a game called Teach a Monster to Read, which is an educational game for kids. And then before that, I worked on various traditional games. I worked on Sims 2 Mobile and Final Fantasy and Creatures and, a number of other games.
Do you feel like you have different facets of your imagination that you have to use depending on like the game and the mechanics involved?
When you're designing a computer game, there's a bit of the audience in mind and there's a bit of your own playing in mind, and you've got to be careful about which one you're designing for. You've also got to be careful about what your priorities are. So there's story-based games design, and there's more action-based games design, and there's puzzle-based game design, and they'll require just different perspectives on things and different priorities. And then there's level design, which is a whole other aspect to it. And then there's the whole soundscape of the game, which is incredibly important and rarely talked about, which gives you the whole kinesthetic feel of the game. Or I say more emotional feel of the game. So just the way something hits something else and how it sounds gives you a whole different impression of what that thing is and what the interaction is like. So I try and move around perspectives as much as possible once I've got mechanics roughly in place.
Move around in your imagination, you mean?
Yeah, move around conceptually. So move around, okay, this is what it should sound like because we're in this kind of landscape and we're from this camera perspective and it's this kind of air or space. So it would need this sort of reverberation or echo or anything like that. This character I need the player to feel a certain thing from this character. So it needs to have this sort of language and it should be surprising because that's always fun in the computer game. So how do we make language surprising just through text? And there's lots of different perspectives.
How does this translate to the emotions, whether it's the emotions that you imagine your characters in the game to feel or emotions in like real life? What's your imagination capabilities when it comes to the emotions of people?
I guess it's complicated for everyone. I like to try and put myself in different people's perspectives. That takes quite a lot of effort. So when we're making educational games, this is me and my business partner, we're thinking about if you're a young kid, and we both have dyslexia, myself and my business partner, and we both had a rough time at school. So we know what it's like to be in a classroom with lots of smarter kids, supposedly, and they're all getting the right answers and you're not getting the right answer. So when designing a computer game for education reasons, we're trying to think, okay, putting ourselves back into that situation, what could the game do to make us feel more confident and more interested in learning? And what are the things that put us off? So we're trying to make things that don't chastise you for getting things wrong. In fact, they encourage you sometimes to get things wrong because then you're more incentivized to get things right. So if you get things wrong in some of our games, something funny will happen. And they'll, the player might laugh and feel much more relaxed about trying it again because it's funny, and they might want to get it purposely wrong again. But eventually they need to get it right to progress, but we're not punishing them for not progressing. So that's partly making them feel more comfortable. So there's a whole conversation we can have just about emotions, but that's a good start, I guess.
So do you imagine yourself being different people playing the game?
Yes, but I think I'm drawing a lot on experience as well. So I'm extrapolating from my own experience to some extremes sometimes.
So you'll have an idea and you might like imagine the emotion of what a kid will feel like when that happens.
Yeah.
And you'll feel that emotion in your body, in your imagination. How does that feel like?
I think when I'm doing it for work, it's more conceptual. So I understand that they might feel this way because of this thing. And I try and imagine from as many different perspectives as possible what they would feel in this situation. So I'm trying not to put any particular perspective off playing more of it. So some might be playing it because it's funny, some might be playing it because it looks good or it plays well. There's all sorts of different avenues that people will take into playing a game.
Yeah. But that part's quite conceptual in contrast to the sound, which sounded more like you're imagining the audio.
Yes. Yes, I think so. Because I don't want to get sort of emotionally bound in the game. I'm just doing it as a mechanic almost. Whereas the sound is, because it is so emotional, I'm thinking about it in more detail. It's quite important sound. So I think about it a lot.
Okay, going back to pushing your imagination to the limits.
Mm,
What's your ability? What's your audio imaginative
mm.
abilities are like? How far can you push it? What does it feel like to have an audio or like a sound clip in your head?
Yeah, so I've got pretty good recall of music. I can, if I'm thinking about it now, I can imagine a number of songs fairly accurately. So there's that aspect of it. That's more of a sort of memory thing. And then there's range of sound. And I think my imagination is fairly close to normal auditory hearing. I mean, if you try and do this, if you imagine a really high pitched noise and then increase that pitch, what happens to it? Does it disappear? What happens?
It, for me at least, it probably reaches the highest pitch I can imagine, and then it
Yeah,
slowly starts to recede.
yeah.
And I'm not sure if this is a result of me actually imagining the sound, or if it's because I've done those tests so many times where, I test how far I can hear my hearing abilities, and it always falls short of like 20,000 hertz or whatever. So yeah, I think it might be coming from memory, just the idea that I
Mm.
can gradually increase the pitch of a noise and then gradually hear it.
And when you're imagining it, can you really hear it?
I think I can.
Yeah,
Maybe not
that's
so much
enough.
the higher pitches, because that seems a bit, that feels like I'm stretching it a bit. And even if I try to like pull it from memory, I struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas any kinds of sound that is well within human range is very easy for me to hear,
Mm-hmm.
and I can hold at least like four different melodic lines, so I can easily imagine a simple orchestra, but not too much more complex that I would be able to. Yeah,
I can do about 4 as well. Do you play an instrument then?
I used to be able to play the piano quite well, but I think I would struggle to play playing the piano now.
Mm-hmm. But I think it's interesting that you can only go as far as your experience goes.
This is
Yes,
so subtle. Yeah, because I have to partially have myself singing it, but I can imagine a higher tone than I can make. But when it gets beyond my hearing limit, I camera cut, and I end up very quickly imagining a dog reacting to the high pitched sound or a child reacting to the high pitched sound.
Mm-hmm. Now, why can't we do that? Why can't we imagine beyond the highest pitch we can hear?
I mean, presumably because it's using the same part of our neural network for the imagination as is used to observe the sounds.
Yeah, but we can extrapolate in other areas.
can we?
Why not pitch? Yeah, a little bit.
Can you imagine new colors?
Well, that's always the classic one, isn't it? No, I can't.
I think it's the same thing. Like pitches beyond my ability to hear, pretty much the same thing as colors that are beyond my ability to see. And I guess I
I
can
guess,
only imagine.
yeah,
Or
I guess what I'm saying is you can extrapolate from component parts that you can experience. So, like, you can imagine an apple that weighs as much as a car. That's not too difficult, even though that doesn't really exist. But they're component parts that you can add together from
Hmm.
normal experience.
I think because with weight, it's such a scalar quantity. It's just
Mm-hmm.
adding more to what's already there. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
sounds and colors, they're very much categorically different. They're qualitatively different. And I don't
Mm.
know what it would look like to have a violet that's more violet than violet. Like, like I'm trying to imagine what ultraviolet is going to look like, and I just see violet.
Yeah, or nothing.
Oh,
Yeah.
nothing, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm now imagining a society that pays as much attention to weight as we pay to sound pitch and has loads of art forms based on the exact weight of objects.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Well, the other thing you could do is you could remap the visual cortex. So you could do all of normal visual wavelengths and reduce that just to red. And then you can expand out the others to the other colors. But you're just remapping. It's not really seeing it. Yeah.
I want to ask about Prophantasia next.
Okay.
What's the difference? So Prophantasia is the word. I think it's aphantasia meow coined. It's not a very official word yet for imagining something not in a separate imagination space in your mind, but in your actual vision in some sense, although you're obviously not actually seeing it. So a way of thinking it, we have the overly negative word hallucination, and it's like a conscious, actively chosen hallucination. So, what's the actual difference between imagining something and imagining something prophantasically? What's it feel like?
So we can do this with an apple as well, right? So I can imagine an apple and it's on that plate in that room with the bright light. But I can also imagine an apple in front of me on this cushion. And as I imagine it, it sort of plonks down as if it's been spawned in a computer game and it deforms the cushion and it's lit as if it was lit in this room. So it's like AR. It's just like it's appeared there.
But it's solid, because I can imagine an apple on the table, but it's just like a shadow of the color of an apple. It's not solid.
It's solid. It takes more effort to make it solid, but it is solid. Again, I used to be much better at this because it's not really a practical use for this. I don't use it as much, but I used to be better at it.
I can imagine it being very entertaining as a child. Which is
Yes,
probably why you found less and less use for it.
that's right. Yeah. So I used to walk to school and in the playground, I'd imagine giant dragons smashing out the pavement and setting fire to buildings, occasionally eating children. That was fun. Don't need that so much these days.
Yeah.
And these looked like there were really dragons there.
Yeah.
And they would swirl through the sky and breathe flame come out of their mouth.
Absolutely.
And it was like you were actually seeing them.
Yeah.
And did that require lots of concentration?
Well, my brain wasn't doing much else, so it was happy to entertain me doing that. Yeah.
So Vynn, if you imagine an apple on the table in front of you, like how solid is it?
I can see through it. It's not opaque at all.
Can
If you make it more opaque?
Yeah, can you if
Could
you
I
put
make it
another
more
5
opaque?
seconds in? Yeah.
I could try, but it doesn't seem to want to become more opaque than than it already is.
Yeah.
It's
It
funny
does take
because
a lot of it.
it does
So
take
do
a
you
lot of
think
effort. And just bringing this back to like a previous episode we did with someone who practiced this kind of meditation technique called fire casino. It was really interesting. Her name's Jane, and she was able to basically imagine things that were opaque and superimpose on her normal vision. And I thought that was well beyond anything that I was capable of doing. But she said that she worked on that for a month and didn't have it before that. And so it suggests to me at least that it's a very trainable skill, especially
Yeah.
if it only takes like a month to get to her level.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I think aphantasia just means you haven't done it much. I think most people can do hyperphantasia or normal fantasia with just a little more effort trying to do it. I think the thing is, it's not really often that useful, so you don't need to do it.
Yeah, we know from brain injury stuff there's a tiny percent of people who actually can't do it, but I think most aphantasics could train to do it better.
Yeah.
And what practical uses you still do get prophantasic things in your day-to-day life, but do you like stuff like when
Well,
you're playing video games you get overlays
a little bit, yeah. Okay, I mean, I don't use it that much, but again, if you're playing like a first-person shooter or something and you're throwing a grenade, you might get little dots or dotted lines to show you where it's going to go. I can put on top, but I think it's more efficient to just conceptually get it rather than overlay it. So I don't use it that much.
Oh, but because you could have that in your mind's eye, not in the prophantasic world. So you could just overlay like a not solid dotted line.
Yeah, and in that situation, I'm not sure what the difference is exactly, because if you're watching the computer game and overlaying it, in what way isn't that profantastic?
And if it's a dotted line anyway, it hardly matters if it's not solid or not
Yeah,
lit
doesn't matter.
correctly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, have you imagined you guys being anything else? This is a game I used to play as a kid as well.
Wait,
Like
what do
not
you
being
mean?
human,
Like being a cat or something.
cat, a chair. The chair was an interesting one for me. I thought that was fascinating. That being a chair.
I don't think I've ever done anything like
No,
that.
again, not many practical uses, but it
I'm
is.
thinking of the rocks and everything everywhere all at once,
Oh
and how
yeah,
hard I found it to imagine being two rocks talking to.
but they're quite animated. Those rocks.
Hmm. Well,
I'm talking about a chair. Imagine being a chair. You've got four legs, a base, and a back, and all the sort of pressures going on there. And then someone sits, or a cat jumps on you. Can you imagine any of that?
no.
No.
I should be able to, because I can feel what it's like being the person in the chair, which is surely just the reverse force of what the chair feels with me being sat on it.
Kind of, yeah.
So I ought to have an idea for how strong it feels to have. And I know what it's like being a chair with a cat sat on me, as it were, because a cat sat on me.
Right.
I know what it feels like to have someone sit on my lap, but
Yeah.
as a human, not
Yeah.
a chair.
Well, if you tried now, what would happen? I mean, you can go down to details in like how the fastenings between the legs and the base work, whether it's glue or nails or whatever,
Mhm.
and seeing how that changes how you feel about things. But if you spent like 5 seconds thinking about being a chair, what happens?
Hmm.
This is good radio, isn't it? 5 seconds, people thinking.
Can you do this, Berbank?
Yeah, yeah. Like I say, I used to do it.
Hmm.
And you can think of different kinds of chairs. You get a different sensation.
Yeah, because the legs have different surface areas and contact areas, so they feel different.
And you imagine, does the chair have any senses other than kinesthetic, like a physical touch?
It's only pressures and contact
And
sensors.
do you feel pressures between subparts of the chair, like I feel pressures between different parts of my body?
Yeah, yeah. Again, accuracy, no idea. Probably not that accurate, but it's a interesting little game to play.
And do you think if you were like a furniture designer, you would do this?
I don't know. You'd have to ask one. Find a good one and see what they do. I imagine they think
Maybe
about it a bit.
car designers imagine they are the car, because when you drive a car, you kind of become the car, so it's not so far different from the user experience.
Right? Yeah. I mean, that's an interesting thing in itself, isn't it? When you get in a car, you have a strange conceptual spatial understanding of how big the car is so that you don't crash into things. But you can get quite close and you almost feel, when you're getting really close to hitting a post because you're reversing or something, you almost get a feeling, don't you, of how close it is.
It's painful almost. It's like,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
like you're about to bang your arm or.
Yeah. So it'd be, yeah, how far can you take that? Are there people who have this sense in extremes and people who don't have the sense at all? Probably.
I think I can imagine this. Yes, I think this is like sort of an extension of proprioception, where you feel the car as an extension of your own body, such
Yeah.
that if you're moving it in a certain way, you can feel it as if it were your own body moving in space. And the more at one you feel with your car, the more unified you feel with its body, the better you can like navigate your way through space with it.
Mm-hmm. That's quite odd though, don't you think? You've suddenly got into something and your body almost disappears and you become the car to some degree, unless you take your focus off it.
Mm. I feel like it's a lot easier for me to do this with a smaller vehicle. So with bikes, it's easier. I
Mhm.
feel myself completely becoming the bike, or with like skateboards and or ice skates. With cars, it's a bit more difficult because they're these big bumbly things, and so it's a little bit more clumsy. But I imagine if someone were driving cars all day and were more skilled at it than I were, then they probably could become one with the car, sort of like be
Yes.
yeah.
I would say it was the opposite for me. I think skateboards and bikes, I feel very much like a human on a bike, whereas in a car, I feel more like the car.
Interesting. Oh, okay.
I can't imagine being an articulated truck. That's too big for me to imagine being.
It's too big.
Yeah, and I don't know how it would articulate, particularly like
So
what the
is
cab.
the problem the size or the articulation?
Both. Whereas a car, because I've driven a car enough, and sometimes I've got like at one with a specific car, I can imagine being the car much more easily. So it's an experience thing again. This is making me wonder if imagination is any different from just being as well, because clearly when we get into a car and we become the car, we're imagining being the car because we're not actually the car. So are we just imagining being our own bodies all the time?
Yeah.
And we know we're imagining our vision all the time because it's reconstructed. We're not actually seeing what we see directly. We're seeing a reconstructed copy of what we see.
Well, this comes down to a sort of what is you thing, right? So, I mean, if you chop some of your hair off, that bit of hair that you've just chopped off is no longer you, but was it really you in the first place because you couldn't sense it? And if you can reduce it down all the way. There's a lovely Ian M. Banks culture novel where an AI mind is getting attacked and it has to retreat into its brain more and more and more and discard little bits. And that's Ian M. Banks is incredible. I think I get a lot of my imaginational starts from reading his books and other books of that ilk.
Which is the book with the brain?
I think that's Consider Phlebas, I think.
We'll check it and put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
So this kind of reminds me of some other fictions that I've read as well, where the idea of a self, or like the self model that we imagine ourselves to be, gets extended into tools or appendages, much in the same way that we might do it for cars. And by default, we are doing constantly with our bodies. And it reminds me of that time when I lost my phone and how I feel like a part of myself just amputated because so much of like my sense of self was just being channeled through my phone in a way that, if I had like cut off my hair, it wouldn't be as consequential, but like losing a phone, that's like losing a limb almost.
Yeah.
And it's just like such a strong sense of self that's like concentrated in that thing. I don't know. What about you? Have you like ever felt such a strong connection to things and feel amputated by having it not with you anymore?
I think the phone is the most common one, isn't it? Everyone
Yeah.
feels, and it's especially odd growing up without mobile phones and then having them and then it becoming so much part of your life. I mean, for me, it's not particularly a big part of my life unless I go out. Going out is, you need a phone to contact people and make sure that they're going to arrive at the same place. Whereas before you just say, I'll meet you here then. And if they weren't there, you'd never meet them. That was it. There's no backup plan. So yeah, I do understand, especially with people who grew up with mobile phones, that it feels like an extension of them and maybe more them than their bodies in some sense, because they're interacting so much through it socially and all the communication is through the phone. And especially in times of COVID, again, it becomes that thing of you're becoming part of the thing you're manipulating.
Yeah.
Your concentration, it's like drumming or other music instruments as well. When you're in the flow, you become
The drum
to an extent that instrument.
Yeah.
Or almost you're an extension of the instrument rather than the other way around, because it wants to do something and you're listening and it channels through you.
You're both like agent and tool of each other.
Yeah.
So this is why I have developed the ability to dream in text, to basically have such a powerful like textual imagination is because I'm like constantly on my phone all the time, and especially like on Twitter, such that whenever I'm dreaming, it's not just plain text that I'm seeing. It's also like the Twitter text box and like the blue button off to the right. And whenever I go over the like the word limit, it becomes the text actually becomes red. That's how I know this is Twitter. I'm like so Twitter brained. And it's just like, as you said, we become the tools that we manipulate, and in return, the tools like manipulate us. So it's kind of
Hmm.
like this interpenetration of agencies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the agency of the tools because a smartphone has more agency than like a kitchen knife and can somehow control you a bit.
Mhm.
And then in the more extreme, something like, because it's in the context of Burbank, I just saw his cat go past a moment a bit ago. Like a cat is not the same as a tool that you're using, but there's some extension of self
Hmm.
with a close friend or a partner or an animal, a pet.
Yeah. I think the more we think about ourselves as processes that are hooked up to sensors,
Mhm.
the more sense it makes. Because as humans, we've got our normal human senses, but phones give us an extra sense, almost an extra limb that we're connected to,
Mhm.
and cats and humans and all sorts of other things give us emotional extensions.
Oh. Oh, so a loved one is an emotional extension in a way that a car is a run faster extension.
You can think of it that way. I mean, yeah. I mean, there's different ways of thinking about your own thoughts as well. So, yeah, I mean, where does your thought? There's a big discussion about LLMs at the moment, and the thing I keep hearing is it's just guessing the next word. Well, how do you know you're not doing that? If you analyze where your sentences are coming from, if you backtrack it, backtrace it back to where that came from, where do you get to? So I just said, where do you get to? Where did that come from? I can try and look back, but it gets quite dark quite quickly. I don't know where that goes, where it comes from. I mean, obviously, it's coming from a lot of experience and memory and interactions that I've had in the past. But yeah, how different is that really from an NLM?
Yeah, I think I have an underlying neural network that I can't perceive that has like a simulation of the world in some sense and
Hmm.
memory and understanding of what's happening. And the words like emerge from that.
Hmm.
But yeah, the mechanism by which the words emerge from the model
Hmm.
is definitely just yeah.
But is it a hard
Load of-
break between your subconscious and your conscious, or can you work back more and more and more if you put effort into it?
I think I've always assumed it's a hard break, but I'm scared. Vin?
I feel like you could always push back, because this is something that I've noticed I've got better at, which is being able to consciously choose words, but also when I'm not paying so much attention to it, especially this becomes more apparent when I'm public speaking, just to let the words flow automatically and make sure that it just comes out in a fluent string of words. Doesn't matter what I'm trying to like put together. Never mind if it's like perfectly chosen or not. It just, as long as it's smooth and fluent, it gets the job done. And I find that it happens automatically, uh, and that's changed over the years. The more public speaking practice I do, the more like voluble the words get, even though it's not quite as like precise as I would want to make it if I had more time writing it down. And so in a way, I'm very much like an LLM in that sense, because like there's like a subconscious part of me which is like predicting like what words should come next and just like quickly putting it on before faster than my thoughts can like uh, think about it. So
Yeah. So I don't think I have that to that degree. I mean, you were talking about having a flow when you're lecturing or talking. I don't think I have that to any great degree, and I'd like it because it's a very useful thing to have in this society. And again, I think it comes from practice. I don't talk a lot, so I don't get better at it. So it'd be another interesting thing would be can you think about how you got better and put that into words? And another problem is not everything is Englishable. So
yes,
there's lots of experience that you
I
can't
find
translate into language. and that's a problem as well. And we're all talking in English, but there's a lot of implied meaning in a lot of things we've said, and we're each going to get a slightly different bias on that. And people listening to this are going to get a slightly different bias on it as well. Yeah, it's a difficult interface to get a lot of nuance through. It's much better if you just say, we're going to fight that castle over there. That's quite clear.
Yeah.
But when you're trying to explain inner models of mental consciousness, then it gets a little bit trickier.
So someone who has, we know from Hilbert's descriptive experience sampling that there are people who spend 70% of their time using their inner voice.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems likely that if you use language in your internal thinking that much, you're going to be better practice. And when it comes to speaking, you might be better at speaking than, say, you're using visual imagination and smell imagination more often.
Mm-hmm. Which is difficult to communicate, which is a problem. I mean, I'd like to talk more about Vynn's imagination with the Twitter feeds. So when you're dreaming Twitter feeds, are you having conversations with yourself? And when you see the text, do you properly see it, or are you conceptually aware of its meaning?
I think it's a little bit of both. It's becoming more I can properly see it, but the default would obviously be, I can conceptually sense the meaning. But sometimes, and quite a lot of the time as well, actually, I can actually like visualize the individual like characters. And because like it is in a box after all, like
Yeah.
it is in a Twitter box, it does go over the word limit. It does become red as a result of that. So I am literally like seeing the imagery of it.
Does it appear in one block as if it's been tweeted, or do you write it out?
I don't think I write it out. I think it's there, and I'm like my brain's just like producing it, which is hell of a lot more convenient than having to like fiddle with my thumbs.
But wait, so when it becomes red, do you edit it in your dream and make it so you can tweet it? Or do you just get like emotionally annoyed you can't express your thoughts in 180 characters?
I think I
Whatever the
can
limit is.
just because it's my dream. I don't think the character limit actually does anything. It's like there. I can just ignore the fact that it's gone to the red and just continue like pouring my thoughts into
What
red.
conversations do you have in your dreams?
Oh, I don't know. I can't really remember that now. But like,
No.
I think it generally takes the form of like the regular tweets that I have, which is basically just like bite-sized like thought nuggets or whatever, and I just like have to put stuff out. Yeah,
But
they're very much brain farts.
you don't journal your dreams then, or anything like that.
I try to. I definitely have done. I was more diligent about it in the past, but yeah, these days I don't really do that.
So you don't know if your dream tweets have revealed anything that your conscious mind doesn't know.
Oh no, I haven't really looked into that yet. So the answer is no at the moment.
Because I think one of the things I like about dreams is it's potentially a link to your subconscious and your conscious, linking them up. And Jung did a lot of work in this area, and he's a fascinating chap with his active imagination. And he had this thing where he could lucid dream at will. And one thing he did, which is incredible, is if a character would visit him in his lucid dream, he wouldn't let them leave until they told him why they were there.
Oh, I wish I could do that. My cousin
I wish
can lucid dream. I always find that a very fascinating ability that she always had. I used to be able to lucid dream. Well, I wasn't born able to lucid dream. I learned how to lucid dream, but then I realized how costly it was to like have like poor sleep, and I just decided, you know what, it's fine to not to not lucid dream and just like let the dreams come whenever they want and not have complete control over it. So I just like let that ability slide. But if I had continued down that path, I think I would have been far more like skilled at being able to control my dream state or whatever.
Wait, so if you lucid dream, you're more tired in the morning, like the rest
Yes.
wasn't as good?
Yeah, the rest wasn't as good because like I think it is REM sleep or yeah, and there's all like these like dream checks you have to make sure you're doing throughout the day as well.
Yeah. So I used to have lucid dreams as a youngster, and then I stopped having them, and then I trained myself in the same way you did, and had them for a while. But then they got quite terrifying because I could no longer tell if I was actually dreaming or not. Because I had sort of an inception thing where I'd wake up from a dream, but I'd actually still be in a dream, and I
Oh, that's
could
terrible.
no longer tell.
That's terrible.
That was terrible. Yeah, so that put me off for a while, but I'm still interested in it.
So do either of you try to do this in the day? Because you can both like imagine a scene or imagine a story or read a book and imagine something. So do you ever try to do the Jung thing of letting your imagination be more dreamlike while you're awake?
I personally haven't done it. Berbank, what about you?
I think it takes too much effort.
Yeah.
So the active imagination thing that Jung specifically talks about, I think you have to have almost no sensory input to do it, when you're starting out at least, because it's not so much effort, it's almost non-effort, but that's an effort in itself. You have to wait for the images to come for you while not falling asleep, and it's tricky.
Because most meditation practices, they're telling you not to imagine anything.
Yeah.
Whereas this is the opposite.
Well, no, it isn't. I think active imagination is sort of a weird boundary between the two. So the way I understand it is you close your eyes and you look into the dark as if it's 3D, but you don't actively project anything. And then you wait for your brain to create images. That's what I try and do anyway. But it's not easy.
So it does sound like a parallel skill to meditation, but with a different focus. And
Yeah.
a similar concentration and patience needed.
Yep.
Yeah.
Sounds about right.
But do you think you can do that with other senses, like allow audio to arise or allow emotions to arise?
Yep.
You're saying yes, Vynn, like you've done it.
Yes, I think I have done it.
Which one?
Letting things arise.
And you get, but more, and you get audio or emotion more easily than video?
Okay, I think emotions definitely come slightly easier, but they're pretty much the same, I would say, because like I'm not doing anything; they're coming of their own accord, and so between the three of them, these three different things: sounds, visualizations, or emotions.
Do you ever get tweets that just appear?
No, I do get video. I do get ideas that need to be tweeted, like unbidden, but not like the visualization. That only comes like very rarely in dreams.
I love how you said needed to be tweeted.
Yeah. They need to be tweeted.
What happens if they don't get tweeted?
Then I get constipated.
Yeah, so previous generations needed to eat food, and now in the smartphone area, people need to post on social media.
I always just get clogged up, the same thing is true for like emotions as well. Like if an emotion starts bubbling up, I need to feel it, because if I don't feel it, then I have to suppress it, and that can turn ugly. And yeah, it just needs to be. There's like this wonderful thread that I read somewhere on Twitter where like ideas or emotions are like, it's like feces, like it's like shitting, where you have to like basically shit it out, because the more you keep it in, the worse it'll be for your system. And that's exactly what it is for me. You have to like let it out. I have to like have little brain farts here and there, but every now and again there has to be like a total like dump and just like release it.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have that so much, but I understand.
Any other topics you want to cover, Berbank?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's a whole list I sent you of things that we've gone through most of those. I mean, yeah, I think another funny thing would be to imagine what you could do with an apple. So can you make it appear in front of you with like sparkly effects? And can you make it have an English accent and a monocle and a moustache and talk to you?
I found that question really funny because like I don't know what that means for an apple to have a British accent.
Right.
Or any accent in the first place.
Yeah,
it makes total sense to me.
That's why I've been fascinated with this for such a long time. Is how far can you push your imagination in different directions?
Because when it gets the monocle, it starts moving and it becomes a cartoon apple with little arms and legs.
Yeah.
And the monocle, it's squinting to hold the monocle in, which distorts the appliness of the top
It's
of it.
the face cartoon and the apple a real apple, or is the whole apple a cartoon?
Yeah.
The whole apple becomes, it all becomes a cartoon for me.
Mm-hmm.
Does yours?
No, it stays an apple with a cartoon face.
That sounds weird. That would be a weird show.
I'm just imagining my apple with like the face of Jesus or something on it, and it's still very much an apple, but it's just got one of these like weird like pareidolia things where
Like the Turin Shroud.
Yeah, exactly.
Does it have a beard? A beard on an apple seems wrong somehow.
It doesn't have like a beard made of hair. That'd be weird. It's got like etchings of like hair.
Right.
Sorry, etchings of a beard.
Yeah.
So wait, Berbank, is your monocle well lit, or is the monocle cartoon lit?
I'd say it's a halfway house. It's got sort of cartoon glinting on it when it moves around.
So you can have a dynamic renderer where parts of the image are photorealistic and parts are cartoon.
I can make the whole apple cartoon. I just haven't decided to. I just choose what's best for what I want at the moment.
What kind of British accent does it have?
Like a lord.
Like a really posh one.
That's right, yeah. quite an old lord.
And can you imagine like a Cockney apple?
Yep. It's got a different face, though. Very different face.
And you're hearing it, right? The accent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is just a mind-blowing thing to me.
The Cockney one's getting quite angry that I'm looking at it.
It's got a personality as well.
It's got a personality. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I think as soon as it gets a monocle, it gets a personality.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Berbank.
Thank you for having me on.
This is a fun episode. I hope you enjoyed it as much as we did.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you. That list might be interesting for people to look at as well, to see if they can do those apple exercises.
Oh, yeah, we could put a list of apple exercises in the show notes. That's a fun idea. Yeah. Good thing to do with friends and family as well. Great fun to do with kids.